Hello, welcome, and good evening, Jakarta time. Right now is 6 p.m. Jakarta time. You are watching TVR World Special Report on the closing ceremony of the G20 Summit in Johannesburg. I'm Sesko Satrio, and to know more about the closing ceremony, let's start the special report of TVR World. And the G20 Leaders Summit concluded this Sunday at Johannesburg. It is marking a historic milestone. For the first time for such forum was held in the African continent or the African soil. And the G20 or Group of 20 is an international forum that brings together the world's major economies to address global economic challenges. And this is the update for you.
Founded in 1999 after the Asian financial crisis of 1997-1998, the G20, or Group of 20, became an informal forum for the finance ministers and central bank governors of most important industrialized and developing economies to discuss international economic and financial stability. G20 comprises of 19 countries, namely Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, France, Germany, India, Indonesia, Italy, Japan, Mexico, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, South Korea, Turkey, United Kingdom, and United States, as well as two regional bodies, namely the European Union, or EU, and African Union, or AU. The G20 members represent around 85% of the global gross domestic product, over 75% of the global trade, and about 2/3 of the world population. During its early years, or post-1999, G20 focused on stabilizing the global financial system and preventing future crises. With the 2008 financial crisis, the G20 gained prominence, and leaders began meeting not just finance ministers. Over time, G20's agenda has broadened beyond macroeconomic stability. G20 now talks more and more about.
Now, to know more about the latest updates from the G20 Leaders Summit, we will join Rahmat Idris live from Johannesburg. Rahmat, please give us the latest update from Johannesburg.
Yeah, hi there, Sesko. This has truly been quite a whirlwind, essentially a whirlwind of a weekend right here in the city of Johannesburg as it witnessed the arrivals of world leaders, dignitaries, laureates, their elders touching down on the city, partaking in the first ever in South Africa, first ever on an African soil, the G20 Leaders Summit under the presidency of South Africa and the leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa. Behind closed door at Nasrec Expo Center, the main venue for the G20 Leaders Summit, is the third and the final session of the G20 Leaders Summit here in Johannesburg, which is touching on the equal and balanced critical earth minerals and also the provisions of decent jobs worldwide, and more importantly, ways for these countries to come together to address the challenges of artificial intelligence. And conversations are still being held behind closed doors. We have visuals but no audio. As always, it's a bit confidential when it comes to G20 closed door sessions. And happening behind me right now at the media center here in Johannesburg for the upcoming media reception happening in just a couple of hours to sort of bid farewell to all the journalists, hundreds of us here hailing in from different parts of the globe. This truly is nearing the conclusion, essentially, of the G20's Leader Summit here in Johannesburg. And Sesko, day one yesterday of the Leader Summit here in Johannesburg has it's gone on quite successfully, for lack of better words. From the get-go, President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, began his opening remarks by being father of democracy of Mandela, saying that Nelson Mandela said that this is time for Africa to take up its rightful positions in the world. And that is exactly the sentiment that is shared by all South Africans, and in particular their leader, Cyril Ramaphosa, throughout 2025, having led the presidency of South Africa, bearing the central theme of solidarity, equality, and also sustainability. All revolves around the core principles of Ubuntu, the core principles of the South Africans, I am because we are. But more importantly, yesterday, session one, from the beginning, he called upon all of the world leaders who are present common ground, essentially, to adopt the Leaders' Declaration. And that is exactly what happened at Sasco, which is, if any indication, is a success to at the end of today's closing ceremony will take place in just a few moments from now. Big questions is still in the air. Is there going to be joint leaders' declarations? What will it entail? And more importantly, the thing that's been making headlines, making waves in the past week, will there be handover from South Africa to the U.S. as the next presidency of the G20? That remains to be seen in just a few moments from now. And also day one yesterday, saw the second sessions of the Leader Summits, touching on the issue of the provision of assistance and resolution to countries who are in need in funding to address climate change disasters. Essentially, it's a DRR efforts, the disaster risk reductions, and President Cyril Ramaphosa has been pushing for a 1.3 trillion US dollars for the so-called climate finance to be able to help out all of these nations who are in need to resolve and to reduce the risk of climate change induced countries. And of course, the representative of Indonesia, our Vice President of the Republic of Indonesia, Gibran Rakabuming Raka, was there in person, delivering keen to be a part of, and that was something that he truly echoed. He said, and I quote during his remarks at that particular sessions, that Indonesia experienced over 3,000 natural disaster in the course of 1 year. Reduce the risk of these disasters is something that Indonesia just cannot wait to get on board with. And that was the end of essentially of the day one yesterday, but it wasn't the end of our vice president's duty here in South Africa. He took his time to have a bilateral meeting and a poolside meetings, the sideline meetings, with a number of key notable world and organizations. The Prime Minister of Vietnam, who had the opportunity to be in bilateral meeting with the Vice President of Indonesia, Gibran Rakabuming Raka, and the discussions revolves around the maritime borders between Vietnam and Indonesia, and also ways to address food security. And our Vice President also met with the President of Angola, who is also the chair of African Union, and the Prime Minister. Both leaders, the discussions revolved around food securities and Indonesia's exports towards the African continents, cocoa, coffee, rice, and more importantly, palm oil. And the next part of the bilateral and sideline meetings of our vice presidents was with the president of Finland and also representatives of UNCTAD, and both were touching on the multilateralisms. And these items were confirmed by key coordinating minister, investment minister, who were there alongside him, and we had the opportunity to have a closed sessions with the coordinating minister of economic affairs of Indonesia, Erlangga Hartarto, as well as with the vice minister of foreign affairs of Indonesia, Armanata Nasir, and also vice minister of finance of Indonesia, Thomas Jiwandono, both echoing all of these important aspects that Indonesia is trying to establish in order to create an impactful presence of Indonesia in this represent. Of course, the President of the Republic of Indonesia, Prabowo Subianto. And now, Sesko, we are waiting. I'm actually looking. There you have it in the back. You can see right there. the General of Antonio Guterres shaking hands with other world leaders, meaning that we believe at this point the final sessions, the last sessions of the G20 Leaders Summit has just concluded, and they are taking a quick break before embarking upon the closing ceremony of the G20 Leaders Summit, where we expect President Ramaphosa will be delivering keynote address, closing speech, and more importantly, concluding what all of these world leaders have managed to accomplish in the last couple of days. And we're going to get to see the most talked about questions of the summit, the handover to the U.S., how it's going to happen. And we've delivered the stories in previous occasions as well. So that's thus far what we can report for the first part of our special program. Sesko, back to you. And
thank you, Rahmat, for the updates. We'll join you again later after the closing ceremony to know even more about the latest update after the closing ceremony. Thank you. We'll join you again. And it's not complete if we do not know or do not ask for the experts' opinion about this G20 summit. And now I'm accompanied by the Deputy Executive Director for Research of CSIS, Shafia Muhibat. Mbak Fifi, good evening. It's good to have you here. Fifi, speaking about the G20, this summit is the first time to be held in African soil. Maybe beyond symbolism, what does this summit mean for, maybe you can say, the global South, and of course, even now the African Union is a permanent member. So what does this summit mean?
Sure. First of all, of course, thank you again for having me here. I do think that the G20 summit this year is historically significant. And I do think that it's defined by both deep geopolitical contradiction as well as, in the end, a victory for multilateralism. So on the one hand, the process was complicated by the boycott from the US, as we've discussed. The boycott from the US due to disagreement with both the host, South Africa, and also some of the agendas listed by the host with regards to the G20 agenda. But as you see that since yesterday, the leaders collectively issued a leaders' declaration, it is a shift away from the tradition that it has to be consensus from all G20 members, but this time around it's different because the US was not present. But it was a show of collective will of the other members, and in the end we had the leaders' declaration. So I think it's quite interesting looking at this geopolitical contradiction at the G20 summit and the end result as we see it.
That's an interesting matter. We will talk about that
Sure.
later. But for the G20 itself, South Africa set the theme of solidarity, equality, and sustainability. By that theme, from your perspective, how effective does this South Africa, as the president of the G20, maybe we can say a shift from the traditional Western-centric economy and into the developing or supporting the needs of the African country?
I mean, the fact that we actually have a leaders' declaration despite of U.S. boycott, I think that says a lot of the effectiveness or the work of the host of South Africa. And among one of the things that South Africa brought into the G20 agenda, I think most of them ended in the declaration. So issues like the two issues that South Africa was most passionate about, first is about debt sustainability and also about climate financing. Both of these issues made it to the final declaration. So it shows a lot about South Africa's eagerness into pushing forward with the issues that matter the most to them as a country, but also to Africa as a region.
We've also maybe noticed that the essence of summits, of gatherings of leaders of the world is after the summit itself. So by witnessing that superpower leaders, we can say, like Donald Trump, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, is absent from the summit. How do you see this summit will progress after the summit itself? Will it, reduce the impacts, or how do you see that?
I think we can look at it from at least two different angles. So if you want to try to assess the impact now, we see that the result of the leaders' declaration means that there is very minimum impact of the absence of these world leaders, right? Because without them, we still have the leaders' declaration. Yeah. But if you want to assess in the long run after the G20, again, looking at the history of G20, of course, the adopted declaration is a significant political achievement. But as we learn from the history, the pattern of implementation of G20 declarations has been slow, especially with regards to issues like debt sustainability and climate financing. The process of implementation have been very, very slow. It takes a lot of political will to carry out a lot of these programs, and that is something that is still lacking from almost all of G20 members. Yeah.
And one of South Africa's concrete proposals in this G20 summit is the establishment of a cost of capital commission to address the debt sustainability of the low-income countries. And in this mechanism, do you see the developed countries, maybe who hold much of the debt, you can say, actually agree to restructure these financial schemes or architectures?
Yeah, exactly. So this is exactly what I meant earlier when I say about the implementation process. It's going to be very slow, because as a rhetoric, of course, all of the countries will say they support the plan, because theoretically speaking, it's good on paper. It's really good on paper that developing countries need help in terms of restructuring their debt and so on. But of course, it takes a lot of financing, and from whose pocket is it going to come from? So that is a matter of financing is always a burden to a lot of countries, especially if you look at the current global financial situation, where all countries are trying to save money or redirect their financing into more investment and so on. So there will be less resources to support these plans. So one thing we can easily predict is that, again, looking at it from the history of G20, the implementation is going to be very, very slow.
Okay. Speaking about other thing that Rahmat said, the closing ceremony will be going on slightly after this. And do you ever heard or maybe witnessed about the moving on the presidency from one country to another country without the other country is present in the summit or the conference or the gatherings? Because we know that there are no United States delegation right now in Johannesburg. But after the summit, we'll have a pause about that, because right now the closing ceremony already start in Johannesburg. So we'll go to Johannesburg to hear about the closing ceremony.
G20 will require a rather strong partnership between Africa and the G20, and indeed between Africa and the rest of the world. Recognizing our interconnectedness as a global community of nations, we have called for an end to conflicts and wars around the globe, and for a just and comprehensive and lasting peace. This summit has taken place at a crucial time, as calls around the world grow louder for progress on the imperatives of our time: to end poverty in all its forms and ramifications, to reduce inequality within and amongst countries, and to take urgent action to combat climate change. This year, we have recognized the growing debt burden that is faced by many developing economy countries as a major obstacle to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. The G20 has pledged to extend support to low and middle-income countries as they confront debt vulnerabilities. Together, we must create a virtuous cycle of reduced debt, higher public investment, and more rapid and inclusive economic growth. When we become more successful, all of us, then the whole world becomes successful. When we began our presidency, we pledged to mobilize the G20 to strengthen disaster resilience and response. Climate-induced natural disasters spare no country. Disasters know no borders. But their toll is heaviest on those without the means to recover and to rebuild. We therefore called on G20 leaders to urge the global community to scale up post-disaster reconstruction. In this regard, South Africa introduced the high-level voluntary principles for investing in disaster risk reduction and encouraged international collaboration to strengthen investment in preventing and responding to disasters. We've made progress in mobilizing finance for a just energy transition. Climate change touches every nation, but it impacts on everyone unevenly. That is why we have together pledged to increase the quality and the quantity of climate finance to developing economies, to strengthen multilateral development banks, to support country platforms like the Just Energy Transition Partnership, and to unlock private capital. We reaffirmed our dedication to energy security, affordability and universal access, and the importance of supporting developing economies in their transition to low carbon emissions. We recognize the need for deep, rapid, and sustained reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and the need to substantially scale up investment and climate finance from all sources. During this summit, we reaffirmed our support for the G20 Critical Minerals Framework, a cooperative blueprint to ensure that critical minerals resources drive prosperity and sustainable development across the globe. Our presidency coincided with the end of the first cycle of the G20 presidencies. Following the mandate given to our presidency at the 2024 Rio de Janeiro summit, we undertook the G20 at 20 review, drawing on the diverse perspectives of participating members and guest countries as well. It is our hope that the recommendations of the review will serve as a helpful guide for the G20 to ensure that it remains fit for purpose in an ever-changing world. In fact, the indicative report already says that the G20's existence should continue as it serves a good purpose in giving guidance to the economic well-being of the world. At the heart of our presidency lies a conviction that the G20 must act boldly and act together to create an environment of inclusive growth, an environment of reduced inequality, and environment which will support sustainable development. South Africa has used this presidency to place the priorities of Africa and the Global South firmly at the heart of the G20 agenda. Building on the developmental agenda of previous presidencies in Indonesia, in India, and Brazil, we have prioritized the issues that matter most to developing economies. And in executing our task as the G20 president, we learned a lot from what Indonesia did, what India did, and what Brazil did. So in many ways, what we see having unfolded here was based on the foundations that those three countries of the Global South put in place. The G20 South Africa Summit Leaders' Declaration is more than words. It is a commitment to concrete actions that will improve the lives of people in every part of the world. Our agreement on a declaration during this summit demonstrates the value of the G20 as a forum that can facilitate joint action on issues of shared concern. Shared concern not only for the leaders, but shared concern for the peoples of the world. More than that, it reaffirms our renewed commitment to multilateral cooperation and our recognition that our shared goals outweigh our differences. Together, we must accelerate progress towards the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations and the Pact for the Future. We have laid the foundation of solidarity. Now we must build the walls of justice and the roof of prosperity. Let us move forward together, demonstrating to the world that we do have the capacity to confront and overcome the world's challenges. Through partnerships across society and by remembering our common humanity, we can create a more secure, a more just, and a more prosperous world. And together, we can ensure that no one is left behind. I now say that this gavel of this G20 summit formally closes this summit and now moves on to the next president of the G20, which is the United States, where we shall see each other again next year. The summit is therefore closed. Where is the United States? They are not here.
It was a great meeting. First, not bad. I'm looking forward to the whole cooperation.
Yeah, there you go. We see the closing ceremony of the G20 summit in Johannesburg, South Africa. President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, said that the next president of G20 is still the United States, Murphy Fee. So back to my question, how do you see this without the next president is in the summit? How do you see this?
Well, it's definitely never happened before, I think. So it's something new. But I don't think it changes any of the original plan of U.S. hosting the next G20 summit. News reports said that, because there is no U.S. delegation present at the summit, the official sort of like handover from South Africa to the U.S. is probably going to take place later on at the foreign ministry or something, to the American embassy there in South Africa. But I really don't know the full details of it. But that should not change any of the plans as originally made. It does give a sense of interesting impact with regards to, because G20, yes, it is a very substantive issue, with the leaders' declaration and so on, but it's also very optic with regards to who is present, who is not present. The photo op at the beginning of the summit is usually something that is considered very important. So we missed all of that in the summit. But with regards to the agenda and everything, I think it still goes on as planned.
Okay. Yeah, we hope it will go as planned, because we hope, of course, for more close relationship within all countries in this world, of course. And speaking about one of the issues addressed in the G20 summit, the climate change and the just energy transition is one of the high agenda on the G20. And once again, the U.S. administration under President Donald Trump has, explicitly stated that boosting climate actions runs counter to their policy, to U.S. administration's policy. So how can the G20 produce more meaningful climate recommendation when the world's largest economy is actively distancing itself from the issue?
Sure. I mean, more meaningful is, I think it's a big word. If we go back to when Indonesia was president of G20 back in 2022, we did propose that as well. And JETP was approved as a plan back then. But then, after the summit, realistically speaking, the initial JETP plan was, I think, around 20 billion, which is a fraction of the real estimate that was made back then to actually fund the project, which was, I think, reached 250 to 300 billion. So it was on the 20 billion was only a small fraction, not even 10% of it. So this is exactly what I said. On paper, all of it are good. But I think in the implementation plan, financing is always the issues. There is, less and less country wanting to put their money where the plan is. And this is where it gets really difficult for any of the G20 members to actually carry out some of the agreed upon statements in the declaration, be it on climate, be it on debt, restructuring, and so on. Yeah.
Okay, so with lots of things going on, given we can say the quote unquote the boycotts and the debt crisis and climate agreements, what is the realistic best case scenario to do after this? By U.S. is not present at the summit. What concrete things should happen after this G20, in your opinion?
I mean, G20, although we may complain about the slow process of implementation and so on, but I do think that a forum like G20 is still very much needed, because it is a form of dialogue and it represents a working together between the developed nations and the developing countries. And again, this is the first time G20 summit was held on the African soil. Really a representation of the interests of developing countries. Again, this is the last of the series of developing countries as president of G20. So started with Indonesia, and then India, and then Brazil, and then South Africa. Next year will be the US, so back to the developed country. So, as a developing country, Indonesia and the rest, we are dependent on the existence of this types of dialogue, because whether we like it or not, we need to be involved in this dialogue to ensure that the agenda of the global south, of the developing countries, are taken into account in multilateral frameworks. So I think this is something we need to carry moving forward, even though there are problems with the implementation. There are criticisms, strong criticisms towards G20. I have had my share of criticizing the G20 as well, but we still need it as a forum where this dialogue takes place.
Okay, Murphy. To know more about the G20 summit after the closing ceremony, we'll join again with Rahmat Idris from Johannesburg. So, Rahmat, after the closing ceremony, any other updates can you tell us?
Yeah, hi there, Sesko. It's good to see you again. That was it. Just like that, the entire deliberations of the G20 Leaders Summit here in Johannesburg has come to an end. That was such a quick, lightning speed, very precise closing ceremony of the G20 Leaders Summit. The closing remarks, the words from President Cyril Ramaphosa were just, for lack of better words, deep and profound and truly embodying all the spirit that the president has been championing in the last year throughout 2025, all the key points of his presidency of South Africa. And I cannot begin to tell you, Cisco, what the energy level was here at the media center where we're reporting right now. Just until just a few seconds ago, people erupted in cheers. Tears of joy, and people were singing and dancing in the back, echoing the excitement and the success of the G20 presidency of South Africa. And as there was no apparent and obvious and hand-over, essentially, of all the documents of the G20 towards the next presidency. The gavel was pounded by President Cyril Ramaphosa. However, the chair of the next presidency, which is the United States, was empty, which is, in a sense, similar to what's been reported in the past week, essentially. But what's also very interesting was the fact that yesterday, here in the media center, we were visited by the Minister of International Relations, essentially Minister of Foreign Affairs of South Africa, and he was here on hand delivering the stance and the expected key outcomes of the G20 summit. And a lot of the journalists by then, including me, were raising questions about this particular handover. And in his very diplomatic way, Sesko, Minister of International Affairs of South Africa, responded to these questions, saying that we will afford United States the same respect that they afforded us. So by then, he then clarified, saying that since the U.S. sends their charge d'affaires, which is the representative of the U.S. Embassy in the capital Pretoria, to accept the handover from President Ramaphosa, they're going to do the same courtesy. The South African government will be sending the representative of their government also at another time to the U.S. Embassy in Pretoria to hand over essentially the documents, the presidency to the U.S. And this is the way, again, that the Minister of International Affairs saying that we are giving them the same kindness that we are given. We are not being unfriendly toward the U.S. For them, the U.S. remains one of the most important markets, if not the most important markets to South Africa, but we will afford them, but again, the same respect that was given to us. And by then, also a lot of South Africans around me who were standing around truly echoed that particular sentiment, Sesko, meaning that this is something that President Cyril Ramaphosa has said time and again, that not one country should be bullied by another, as we are equal. And these particular phrases have been used over and some of the key points from the closing address for the closing ceremony that we all witnessed today was the fact that the inclusion is of the paramount importance for all countries around the globe. And this is echoing what Indonesia has been championing since our presidency back in 2022, which is inclusive and sustainable growth, economic growth at that, with no one left behind. So essentially everyone is included, be of the G20 and all the countries beyond. This is a highly important note for the presidency. And also the second point was the fact that we need to stand together to address the challenges of climate change disasters, especially for developing nations, raising all the necessary assistance, all the necessary climate funding. And lastly, he addressed the fact that the equal distributions of rare earth minerals is highly important, and all the even more at some point as sign paying respects were here present, delivering their address towards addressing some of these crucial challenges that the global communities are facing, providing decent jobs, and more importantly, the challenges of artificial intelligence. And right now, I don't know if you can hear it in the back, the mic is being handed over to the president of Turkey, who is right there. If you see me in the back, President of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is currently right here in the media center addressing the members of the press. And at some point, we're going to head over to the podium and ask questions. So this is a pivotal moment. And on the other side, the Vice President of the Republic of Indonesia, Gibran Raka Buming Raka, is reported to be at another gate of the media center, also ready to deliver his keynote answers to some of the most pertinent questions from the members of the press. So at this very point in time, as we speak, happening around me, President to the press, and on the other side of the media center, Vice President of Indonesia, VP Gibran, is also to media. And right after this, our VP is scheduled to head over back to the hotel where he stayed at Santon and Saxon Hotel in Johannesburg, before departing at 2:30, that is essentially 45 minutes from now, to the so-called Ad-Duha Mosque to meet with some of our Islamic students there and do a quick prayer together. And then immediately at 4 p.m. today, flying back to Jakarta. And this has been quite deliberation over in South Africa. And of course, on behalf of Indonesian government, we extend our heartfelt congratulations and appreciations to the government of South Africa for a very successful effort concluding the series of developing economies hosting the G20 summit. And we're going to go ahead over to the podium and listen to what President Erdogan has had to say. In the meantime, that concludes our report from Johannesburg, South Africa. Rahmat Idris and Danu Dirja Mukti there behind the camera. Over to you, Siska. Over to you, Sesko.
Right. Thank you very much, Rahmat Idris, for your report live from Johannesburg, South Africa. We'll look forward to your other reports. And Mbak Vivi, it is mentioned that South Africa too respect U.S. presidency despite absence, and it's also said that South Africa emphasizes togetherness in G20. What is South Africa trying to say here?
I think what they are trying to say is that, you know, they wish for the plan to move forward as it is, which means that there should be a handover to the U.S. So that's why they will go through the trouble of, you know, delivering the documents to the South African embassy, as we heard from Idris earlier. But I think it also sends a message that, you know, they want to do it on an equal measure. So if the handover had been done at the closing ceremony, that would mean that the president of South Africa will be handing it to the embassy, which is not a parallel equation, right?
Sorry,
so,
apologies.
sure, no worries.
Fifi, we're going to hear President of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan.
Artan diyalog ve temasları önemsiyoruz.
We attach great importance to the growing dialogue and engagement between our governments, as well as between the ANC and our AK Party.
Türkiye olarak önümüzdeki dönemde de bu ivmeyi güçlendirerek devam ettirmek arzusundayız.
Turkey is determined to strengthen this positive momentum in the coming period.
Şurası bir gerçek ki Güney Afrika Cumhuriyeti'nin Sayın Nelson Mandela liderliğinde ırkçı apartheid rejimine karşı zaferi tüm dünyada adalet ve eşitlik arayışının en güçlü sembollerinden biri olmuştur.
It is an undeniable fact that the victory of the Republic of South Africa under the leadership of Nelson Mandela over the apartheid regime has become one of the strongest symbols of the global quest for justice and equality.
Güney Afrika'nın Filistin davasına yıllardır verdiği ilkeli ve sarsılmaz desteği bu bakımdan çok kıymetli buluyorum.
And in this context, I greatly value South Africa's principled and unwavering support for the Palestinian cause over the years.
Özellikle çoğu çocuk, kadın ve sivil 70 bin Filistinlinin şehit edildiği Gazze soykırımında Güney Afrika örnek bir duruş sergiledi.
In particular, during the genocide in Gaza, where 70,000 Palestinians, most of them children, women, and civilians were massacred, South Africa displayed exemplary resolve.
Tüm dünyanın gözleri önünde Gazze'de insanlığa karşı suç işlenirken tıpkı Türk milleti gibi Güney Afrikalı dostlarımız da vahşete sırtını dönmedi.
As crimes against humanity were committed in Gaza before the eyes of the world, our South African friends, like the Turkish people, did not turn their backs on this brutality.
Uluslararası Adalet Divanı'nda İsrail aleyhine açtıkları soykırım davasıyla yürekli bir tavır takınan Güney Afrika Devleti'ni, toplumunu, yöneticilerini tebrik ediyor, ülkem ve milletim adına saygıyla selamlıyorum.
I commend the South African state, its people, and its leaders who courageously filed a genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice, and I salute them on behalf of my nation, my people.
Türkiye olarak biz de kimseden çekinmeden Filistin davasına çok güçlü biçimde sahip çıktık. Her platformda Gazze'li mazlumların hak ve hukukunu cesaretle savunduk.
Turkey too has fearlessly stood by the Palestinian cause, defending the rights of the oppressed people of Gaza at every platform.
103 bin tonu aşan insani yardımlarımızla Gazze'li kardeşlerimizin yanında olduk.
With over 103,000 tons of humanitarian assistance, we have supported our Palestinian brothers and sisters.
Şimdi bildiğiniz gibi bizim de katkılarımızla bir ateşkes sağlandı.
As you know, a ceasefire has now been achieved also with our contributions, among others.
Biz çatışma ortamına tekrar dönülmemesi için üzerimize ne düşüyorsa yapıyoruz.
We spare no effort to prevent a return to conflict again.
Gazze'de yaşanan yıkımın neticelerinin mümkün mertebe hafifletilmesinin küresel bir sorumluluk olduğunu vurguladım. İnsani yardımlar ve yeniden imara destek istedim.
And during our summit, I emphasized that mitigating the consequences of the destruction in Gaza is a global responsibility, and I called for humanitarian aid and support for reconstruction.
Tabii bu noktada sağlanan ateşkesin devamını temin ederken kalıcı çözüm için iki devletli formülün hayata geçirilmesi büyük önem arz ediyor.
Of course, while ensuring the continuation of the ceasefire, it is of paramount importance to implement the two-state solution for a lasting settlement.
1967 sınırları temelinde başkenti Doğu Kudüs olan özgür bir Filistin devleti kurulmadan küresel barış tam
That
manasıyla
was Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, where he spoke heavily about, he praises South Africa's support for Palestine. And just maybe a couple of days ago, I guess, there was this news about a mysterious plane that landed in South Africa, if I'm not mistaken. But Fifi, do you have any take on that, about the mysterious plane that carries a lot of Palestinian landed in South Africa? Is there any, what message is that from? I mean, and what South Africa did, is it the right thing to do?
I unfortunately have no details
Okay.
About this incident, but what we know for sure is that Gaza is a topic that was highly discussed at the G20 this time around, although not as significant as making the priority agenda as issues of climate, for example, but it was an issue. And as we heard just now from the Erdogan's speech, He really raised about the importance of looking into this matter closely. And I do think that it is high time that this becomes an even stronger global issue because we seriously need to find an end to the conflict.
Of course, that's right. And before that, we are talking about something that South Africa is always saying about. They emphasize togetherness and they want to respect the next presidency as they've been respected. How do you see about this?
Yeah, so I do think that the solution that we have right now with the handing over officially done at the South African at the U.S. Embassy in Johannesburg later on, I think it's a good alternative. It still shows a lot of respect, but still putting it at the right proportion. So I don't see anything wrong with that, and I don't see any changes with regards to the U.S. Hosting it next year. But what will be interesting to see is that because we see the declaration this year and the result this year is very strong on issues that the U.S. is boycotting this year. So it's only normal that we then question the continuity of these issues next year when the U.S. becomes president of the G20, because definitely they are not going to carry it forward. But then again, you know, the declaration is a collective results of the other G20 members, G19 if you want to say it. So they would want to see that the result, the agenda is carried on forward. So I think we will see a very interesting G20 year next year.
Next year, yeah. It's exciting to look in the next year's G20. To know more about maybe the differences about the absence of United States, between United States with China and with Russia. Can you explain to us, I mean, to know more, because Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin is not also present at the G20.
Sure. I think we need to sort of like differentiate between all of this non-attendance of these leaders. The U.S., I think we can call it full-blown boycott because it's an order directly from Donald Trump. He gave at least two reasons. First, he says the South African policies are not in line with the U.S. He raised issues, for example, like the treatment towards the white Afrikaners and so on, which is something that the South African government has seriously and has vehemently denied. And then he also raised the issue about the agenda of the G20 itself. As we know, U.S. under Trump is not big on climate issues. They're not happy with the agenda, with the whole debt financing, restructuring. So it's a full-blown order of boycott from the Trump administration so that the U.S. is not present. With Putin and with Xi Jinping, I think we need to call that absence, because for Xi Jinping, I think it's more of a logistical reasons. I think he has reduced quite significantly his international travels for a lot of reasons. And we see that he has sent the prime minister to a lot of multilateral meetings, to ASEAN, for example. So it's more logistical issues on his behalf. With Putin, it's logistical plus legal, because South Africa is a party of the Rome Statute, which means that Putin is, as we know, has an issue with the International Court of Justice. So if he enters South Africa, he might have to be arrested. So that's another logistical issue.
That's the difference between those three leaders. And how about our President Prabowo Subianto? Because we saw the leader from India, from Brazil, also attend the G20. And how about our president? What's the reason behind sending our vice president to the G20?
You need to ask the question to the State Secretariat. But I think the official statement from the palace is that President Prabowo has other duties at home in Jakarta, which is correct because there are a lot of domestic homework as well in Jakarta. So that's the official explanation.
That's a common thing to do sometimes in a country. So. What do you hope after this? The G20 just ended, and then next year, even is it the 1st of December when it is given to the United States. How do you see, or what do you hope? Because we know that, with all of the reasons, the United States boycott this year's G20. So, what will happen next year?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen, but what I can tell you what the expectation is. Coming from a developing country like Indonesia, I think it's the result of this year's G20 is good because it really represents the issues that is of utmost concern for developing nations, like both South Africa, countries like Indonesia, like India, issues like climate, as we mentioned. Those are some of the on the top of the list of the priorities for the developing nations. So I do think that the result is good. So for us, the expectation is, of course, that there will be a clear implementation plan ahead for some of these issues. But again, as I mentioned, if you look at the history of G20, implementation has always been an issue. The process has always been slow, especially those that would involve big financing. So, but then again, as we have also discussed, there is a huge risk of the U.S. Not continuing some of the issues that was discussed this year or was the result of this year. So our expectation is that, the agenda of the developing countries would still continue to be put into account next year, even though the host or the president of G20 is no longer a developing country. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mbak Fifi, for your time. Unfortunately, we're limited also by time, our show. So thank you very much once again, Mbak Shafia Muhibat, Deputy Executive Director for Research of CSIS. Thank you very much for your time. And that's all for today's edition of the special report on the closing ceremony of the G20 Summit in Johannesburg, South Africa. I'm Sesko Satrio. Thank you very much. Until next time.